Hello and welcome to the 6th edition of our Investment Insight series, Magellan Minutes. My name's Jennifer Herbert, Head of Listed Funds at Magellan, and today I'm joined by Elisa Di Marco, one of our portfolio managers. We'll be discussing ESG-linked government policies, the real-world impacts of these policies, and the importance of proxy voting. Thanks for joining us, Elisa.
Thanks, Jen.
Elisa, there's a wide range of ESG risks and opportunities ranging from climate risk to supply chain labour standards to the circular economy. In fact, a number of these risks can be linked back to government policies. Can you talk us through some of these policies and why they've been initiated?
Thanks, Jen. That is a really topical question and something that we've been looking at for some time at Magellan. And what makes it really interesting is that each jurisdiction is on their own journey on how they're assessing these ESG risks and opportunities that you've just mentioned. So a few examples. I think is always the best way to talk through these. So firstly, in Australia. So back in 2018, we legislated the Modern Slavery Act. And this was a really important piece of legislation because many jurisdictions around the world around the same time also codified the modern slavery into legislation. And what's really important about this is it's really brought to the front the awareness for both companies, but also for us as investors in the importance of looking into the supply chain and what risks might be there in order to do those risk assessments. Another example is the United States. So more recently in 2022, they put out the Inflation Reduction Act. And as part of that, they are offering tax credits and grants to help with the energy transition. And this is really a way to reduce the impact of climate change in future years. But what's interesting in the US is while the federal government's trying to acknowledge climate change and reduce the potential risks, at the state level in Texas and Florida, you've seen several policies come out that are looking to discredit climate change. It would be remiss not to mention Europe. We view Europe to be one of the leaders with respect to environmental policies, and there are several different initiatives that they have brought through. For example, they have targets for sales with respect to electric vehicles. In France, they've put out rules regarding the use of single-use plastics within restaurants, and then the European Commission have drafted a legislation about the use of recycled content within their packaging that will be coming out in a few years in order for products to be on the shelves. So as you can see from these examples, there's actually a lot of real world impact that these policies can have, impacting both companies and consumers. But one last final point I think it's important to really note is that when we're looking at these companies, it's not always policy that is leading the risk assessments for companies. Increasingly, companies are acknowledging both ESG risks and opportunities when they're looking at how they're doing their risk assessments, but also how they're allocating capital.
You mentioned real-world impacts. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, this is perhaps one of our most interesting things that we're looking at here at Magellan when we're looking at ESG integration. And the reason why ESG is important to investing is because of those real-world impacts. So ESG risks and opportunities can impact cash flows, be it from the positive or from the negative. And why is that? It's those real-world impacts that could potentially lead to those policy changes that we just mentioned. So I think examples, again, the best way to talk through these. So Chipotle is a restaurant based in the US, and Chipotle have accelerated their adoption of renewables and investment into solar because of that Inflation Reduction Act that we just mentioned. So those grants that have been made available to Chipotle and to others have improved the return on investment for Chipotle. So that is positive for the environment because they'll be increasingly be using renewables, but then positive for shareholders because they're getting access to that lower cost source of energy through renewables sooner than they otherwise would have. So Nestle is another great example. So Nestle's management team acknowledge the risks within their supply chain linked to labour standards. And that's because of their exposure to cocoa farming, but also coffee farming. And these two agricultural products are often family-run farms at which the children of the family could be working on the farms. So what Nestlé are doing to address this potential risk is to be working with those local communities to build schools next to the farms. This makes it easier for the children to be going to school versus working on the farm. But in addition, they're also paying farmers more for when their children do go to school. Now, this is really important, Jen, because one, it's ensuring that they are meeting those regulations of the Modern Slavery Act, but it's also countering the potential negative brand risk that comes with the exposure to supply chain risks. And one final example I think is worth talking about is L'Oreal. So L'Oreal have been investing in packaging for quite some time now. And what's exciting about this is those real world impacts that we see from both the shareholder perspective, but also the community perspective. So as some of their investment, they're really looking to reduce the use of raw materials in their packaging. So for one of their particular hair care brands, in the first generation of investment, they reduced the amount of raw materials in packaging by 45%. By the next generation, it was at 72% reduction in the use of raw materials. So think of those real world impacts. They're using less raw materials, so there's less drawing on the environment, but then on the shareholder side, we're also needing to purchase less raw materials. So it's that lower cost base that we will see through time. So some really important initiatives that we're seeing out there that's important for shareholders, but also important for the environment and the world.
And we're currently in the middle of the global annual general meeting season. How important is proxy voting, and are there any key takeaways that you can share with us from the 2023 AGMs?
Yeah, so proxy voting is a right that all shareholders have, and it's extremely important because when you exercise your right diligently, you can potentially be driving change at a company, which could then lead to positive shareholder outcomes. Because of this importance, Jen, at Magellan, we do all of our proxy voting in-house. And we take that same level of due diligence that you know from us with our investment process into the proxy voting process. Now, you mentioned those key themes and what we've seen in the 2023 AGM season so far. So a few important takeaways. I think the first one really is that shareholders are increasingly interested in sustainability risks or ESG risks. And we get the sense of that because of the increased number of shareholder proposals. That is the proposals that shareholders are putting forward because they're the risks that they view are important to the company. So there's been a lot more coming through this year because ESG risks are increasingly important to society. Now, some of those shareholder proposals that we've seen that we view to be really important, the first ones are related to governance and board structure. So we've had quite a few proposals come through this year about the importance of separating the roles of chair and CEO. So in the US, this is quite a common feature within the corporate governance structure. But at Magellan, we view that it's really important for those roles to be separate because the role of the chair is to be challenging management and to be advocating for shareholders. So when those roles are separate, we have a more prudent governance structure that can lead to positive shareholder outcomes. Another topic that has been quite prevalent this AGM season is all about diversity, equity and inclusion. So DEI, as we like to call it, is important for all companies because diversity in thought can have beneficial outcomes. So each of the proposals that come through, we really have to look at them on a case-by-case basis. The proposals are often asking for increased disclosure or perhaps a third-party audit to really get under the hood and understand, well, what is that this company is doing. So we are encouraging transparency, we're encouraging targets because we would like to see that improved diversity of thought come into each of the companies that we are investing in. And finally, we have climate. It's quite a really pertinent risk area that we're seeing. And that's because climate risks can impact the short, medium and long-term cash flows of each of our companies. So the proposals that we're seeing is against that real importance of that increased disclosure and that alignment between risks and how capital is being allocated. So they're just a few teasers of what we've seen so far, but we're only part way through and hopefully we can talk about the other themes that come through as we progress through the AGM season.
Elisa, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
And thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Magellan distribution team, and feel free to share this update with clients and colleagues as you see fit. Take care.